Ever wondered what shapes the soul of a civilization? For ancient China, much of it began with a river. Not just any river, but the Yellow River, or Huanghe. This wasn't just a source of water. It was a force of nature that forged a unique survival psychology, a kind of cultural DNA that still resonates today. Picture this. You live by a river that gives you life with its fertile silt, but can also take everything away in a heartbeat with devastating floods. This constant dance between creation and destruction meant survival wasn't just about finding food. It was about outsmarting nature itself. You couldn't just react. You had to predict, prepare, and organize. This environment didn't just build farms. It built a mindset. A mindset that valued collective effort over individual heroics, because no single person could tame the Yellow River. Long before the famous philosophies of Confucius or Laozi, there was engineering. The need to control the river, to build dikes, dig canals, and manage irrigation, was the first and most urgent philosophical question. How do we, as a group, survive? This wasn't a debate in a scholar's courtyard. It was a life-or-death problem solved with mud, sweat, and massive coordinated labor. This immense hydrological challenge created the blueprint for Chinese social structure. To build and maintain these waterworks, you needed a powerful, centralized authority. You needed leaders who could mobilize thousands of people, engineers who could plan projects spanning decades, and a system where everyone had a role. Order, hierarchy, and a sense of duty weren't just abstract ideas. They were practical necessities for survival. The emperor's mandate wasn't just from heaven. It was from the river. The very act of managing water gave birth to the bureaucracy and the state. So, in a way, the first government wasn't forged in battle, but in the struggle against the floods. Living by the Yellow River also fundamentally shaped the ancient Chinese concept of time. Unlike a simple daily cycle of sunup and sundown, their lives were governed by the much larger, more unpredictable cycles of the river and the seasons. There were years of plenty and years of devastating floods. This taught a profound lesson. Time is cyclical, not linear. History repeats, and the wise person doesn't just live in the now. They study the past to prepare for the future. This is where the obsession with history, record-keeping, and astronomical observation comes from. Tracking star patterns helped predict seasonal changes, and they hoped the river's behavior. Writing down the history of past floods and successful engineering projects became a survival guide for future generations. Cognition itself was shaped by this need for long-term planning. You had to think in terms of seasons, years, even decades. You saved grain not just for the winter, but for the possibility of a flood year 3 years from now. This constant state of preparation, of thinking in cycles, became deeply ingrained in the culture. It fostered a deep-seated pragmatism and a respect for patience. From this crucible of flood and famine, a core cultural identity emerged: endurance. The Chinese character for patience, zhen, is a pictograph of a knife over a heart. It signifies enduring pain, bearing hardship, and persevering through adversity. This wasn't seen as a weakness, but as the ultimate strength. The Yellow River taught that nature is powerful, disaster is inevitable, and life is often a struggle. The greatest virtue, then, was not to conquer, but to endure. To bend like bamboo in the wind, but not break. To rebuild, generation after generation, no matter how many times the floods came. This spirit of endurance, or 吃苦, which literally means to eat bitterness, became a celebrated trait. It's the story of Yu the Great, the legendary engineer king who spent 13 years taming the floods, so dedicated that he passed his own home 3 times without stopping. His story isn't one of a warrior conquering an enemy, but of a tireless servant of the people, demonstrating relentless perseverance against the natural force. He became the archetypal hero, not for his might, but for his endurance. So when we look at the immense history of China with its dynasties rising and falling, its periods of incredible prosperity and devastating turmoil, we see this Yellow River DNA at work. The capacity for massive, state-led projects like the Great Wall or the Grand Canal, the deep respect for history and learning from the past, the social emphasis on the collective and the family unit, and above all, an almost unbelievable capacity for resilience. The river was a relentless teacher, and its lessons were harsh. It taught that survival depends on cooperation, that order is born from chaos, that time moves in cycles, and that the greatest strength is the will to endure. The Yellow River is more than just a geographical feature. It's the cradle that rocked, shaped, and defined the very soul of a civilization. It's a story of how a struggle for survival became a profound and lasting cultural identity. Have you ever wondered why dynasties in China rose and fell with such dramatic, almost predictable regularity? It's a story that spans thousands of years, a grand epic of emperors, rebels, and vast empires. But what if I told you that the secret to understanding this cycle isn't just about battles and politics? It's about a powerful idea, a concept that linked the heavens directly to the emperor's throne. This idea is the mandate of heaven, or Taming. Now this wasn't just some fancy title or a divine right to rule unconditionally. The mandate of heaven was more like a cosmic performance review. It proposed that heaven, a powerful and moral force, granted the right to rule to a just and virtuous leader. The emperor wasn't just a king. He was the son of heaven, responsible for maintaining harmony between the heavens, the earth, and all of humanity. His job was to be a good ruler, to care for his people, ensure justice, and perform the proper rituals. As long as he did this, his dynasty would prosper. But here's the crucial twist. The mandate wasn't permanent. It could be lost. If an emperor became corrupt, cruel, or incompetent, heaven would show its displeasure. How? Through natural disasters. Floods, famines, earthquakes, and plagues weren't just random acts of nature. They were seen as cosmic warning signs. They were heaven's way of saying, hey, the guy in charge is messing up. This belief had a profound impact on Chinese political thought. It meant that a ruler's power was directly tied to his morality. He couldn't just do whatever he wanted. He had a sacred duty to his people. If he failed in that duty, the consequences were dire. Widespread suffering and chaos were interpreted as evidence that the emperor had lost the mandate. And this is where it gets really interesting for the people. The loss of the mandate of heaven gave them a legitimate reason to rebel. Peasant uprisings and rebellions weren't just seen as treason. They could be interpreted as the will of heaven itself, a righteous movement to overthrow a corrupt ruler and install a new, virtuous one. The leader of a successful rebellion wasn't just a usurper. He was the one chosen by heaven to start a new dynasty. He had proven his virtue and worthiness by bringing order back from chaos. Think about the transition from the Shang dynasty to the Zhou dynasty. Around 1046 BC, this is where the concept was first formally articulated. The Zhou leaders claimed that the last Shang king had become a decadent tyrant, forfeiting his divine right to rule. By overthrowing him, the Zhou weren't just seizing power. They were fulfilling heaven's will. This became the template for every dynastic change that followed. When a dynasty fell, its historians would write chronicles detailing the final emperor's moral failures, justifying the transfer of power. This reframes the entire idea of dynastic collapse. It's not just a story of military defeat or economic failure. It's a moral tale. The end of a dynasty wasn't a tragedy in the same way we might think of the fall of an empire. Instead, it was seen as a necessary correction, a cosmic rebalancing. The system was designed to be cyclical. A new dynasty would rise, full of virtue and vigor. Over generations, power might corrupt, and the rulers would become complacent. Disasters would strike, rebellion would brew, and a new hero would emerge to claim the mandate and begin the cycle anew. This cyclical pattern from order to chaos and back to order became the fundamental structure for understanding Chinese history. Each dynasty was a chapter in this ongoing story, defined by its founder's virtue and its final ruler's failure. It provided a powerful narrative that explained why things happened the way they did. It gave meaning to suffering and hope for renewal. So the mandate of heaven was more than just a political theory. It was a mechanism of governance. It forced rulers to be mindful of their conduct and their people's well-being. Of course, it was also a brilliant piece of political propaganda. Any successful ruler could claim they had the mandate, and any ruler facing hardship could be accused of losing it. It was flexible, powerful, and deeply embedded in the culture. This idea put morality at the very heart of politics. It wasn't enough to be strong. A ruler had to be good. This focus on ethical leadership shaped the development of Chinese philosophy, particularly Confucianism, which provided a detailed blueprint for what a virtuous ruler should look and act like. The ideal emperor was a sage king, a paternal figure who governed with wisdom, compassion, and a deep sense of responsibility. When you look at the grand sweep of Chinese history, the rise of the Han, the golden age of the Tang, the fall of the Ming, you can see the shadow of the mandate of heaven hanging over all of it. It's a powerful reminder that in this worldview, power was never absolute. It was conditional, granted by a higher moral authority, and kept only through righteous action. It's the belief that the right to rule had to be earned, not just inherited, day after day, generation after generation. This ancient concept raises some timeless questions for all of us. What gives a government its legitimacy? What is the relationship between power and morality? And what happens when those in charge lose the trust of their people? The story of the Mandate of Heaven is a fascinating answer to these questions, written across millennia of Chinese history. Have you ever wondered what makes a society stable for centuries, even millennia? We often look at laws, armies, or economic systems. But what if the most powerful tool for social control isn't external, but internal? What if it's a kind of psychological engineering built right into the human mind? Today, we're diving deep into the world of ancient China to explore a fascinating idea: Confucianism as a grand project to engineer the human brain for ultimate social stability. Let's start by clearing up a common misconception. Confucianism isn't just a dusty old philosophy or a religion. It's better understood as a sophisticated operating system for society, designed by thinkers like Confucius and Mencius over 2,000 years ago. Their primary goal wasn't just to tell people how to be good. It was to solve a massive problem that plagued their era: constant warfare, chaos, and social collapse. They looked at the turmoil of the warring states period and asked, how can we stop this? How can we build a society that lasts? Their answer was radical. Instead of just controlling people's actions, they aimed to shape their very thoughts, emotions, and desires from the inside out. This is what I mean by psychological engineering. The core of this system is something we might find a bit strange today: ritual, or li in Chinese. For Confucians, rituals weren't just empty ceremonies. They were a powerful technology for programming human behavior. Think about it. How do you greet someone of a higher status? How do you serve tea? How do you mourn the dead? Confucianism prescribed incredibly detailed rituals for almost every social interaction imaginable. These weren't arbitrary rules. They were designed to constantly reinforce a sense of order and hierarchy. Every time you performed a ritual, you were physically enacting your place in the social structure. Bowing to an elder wasn't just about showing respect. It was a physical rehearsal of your subordinate role. This constant practice trained the brain to automatically understand and accept the social hierarchy. It wasn't about consciously thinking, oh, I should be respectful. It was about conditioning an instinctual, emotional response. The goal was to make hierarchy feel natural, correct, and even comfortable. By embedding these behaviors deep into the subconscious, Confucianism aimed to preemptively diffuse the root causes of social conflict: ambition, envy, and the desire to challenge one's station. When everyone knows their place and accepts it without question, the potential for instability is dramatically reduced. It's a system designed to suppress the ego and channel individual energy towards collective harmony. This brings us to the next layer of this social engineering project: the creation of fixed social roles. In the Confucian model, you aren't just an individual. You are primarily a son or daughter, a husband or wife, a subject or a ruler. These roles, known as the 5 relationships, were the fundamental building blocks of society. And each role came with a very specific set of duties and obligations. A son owed his father filial piety. A wife owed her husband obedience. A subject owed his ruler loyalty. This wasn't just a social expectation. It was intended to become your cognitive architecture. Your identity was defined by your relationships. Your self was a relational self, not an independent, autonomous one like we often imagine in the West. This framework provided a clear script for how to think, feel, and act in any given situation. Am I feeling angry at my father? My role as a filial son overrides that feeling. Do I want to pursue my own personal dream? My duty to my family comes first. This constant internal negotiation, guided by your social role, shaped the very pathways in your brain. Think of it like this: your brain is a complex network. Confucian education and social pressure were designed to strengthen the neural pathways related to duty, obligation, and communal harmony, while weakening the pathways related to individualistic desires and rebellion. It created a Confucian brain, one that was hardwired to prioritize the group over the self, stability over disruption. The ultimate virtue wasn't self-expression, but self-mastery, the ability to control your personal feelings to perfectly fulfill your social role. This creates an incredibly predictable and stable social environment. When everyone's behavior is guided by the same internal software, society runs like a well-oiled machine. But here's the crucial question: what's the price of this stability? Every engineering project involves trade-offs, and social engineering is no exception. The great trade-off of the Confucian system is stability at the cost of innovation and individual freedom. When a system is designed to suppress ego, reward conformity, and punish deviance, it naturally stifles the very things that lead to breakthroughs: critical thinking, questioning authority, and radical creativity. The Confucian ideal was the junzi, the noble gentleman, who perfects himself within the existing system. The ideal was not the rebel, the inventor, or the iconoclast who tears the system down to build something new. The focus was on moral cultivation, not scientific exploration. It was on perfecting human relationships, not on conquering the natural world. This explains in part why China, which was technologically superior to the West for centuries, experienced a period of relative stagnation. The intellectual energy of its brightest minds was channeled inward, toward mastering the classics and fulfilling social roles, rather than outward, toward empirical science and disruptive technologies. The very mental architecture that created unparalleled social resilience also created a powerful inertia. The system was designed to self-correct and return to its default state of hierarchical harmony, not to evolve into something fundamentally different. So when we look back at the immense longevity of Chinese civilization, we can see the incredible success of this grand experiment in psychological engineering. It created a society that could withstand invasions, rebellions, and natural disasters, always regenerating its core structure. But we also see the profound trade-offs. The emphasis on ritual, hierarchy, and role-based identity created a cognitive framework that prized harmony above all else, often at the expense of individual aspiration and disruptive progress. It has a powerful lesson in how the ideas we live by don't just shape our culture. They literally shape our brains and in doing so determine the destiny of a civilization. The story of the Confucian brain isn't just ancient history. It's a timeless reminder that the way we structure our minds is the most fundamental act of world building there is. Have you ever wondered why some civilizations rise and others fall? It's a massive question, but a huge part of the answer lies in technology. Not just flashy gadgets, but the kind of foundational tech that solves a society's biggest problems. And when we look at ancient China, we see a masterclass in technology as a survival strategy. We often hear about the four great inventions: the compass, gunpowder, papermaking, and printing. But what if I told you these weren't just brilliant sparks of genius? What if they were desperate solutions to urgent problems of governance, economics, and even the human fear of death? Let's start with something we use every day: paper. Before paper, Chinese officials were writing on bamboo slips. Imagine running an empire the size of a continent using heavy, clumsy bundles of wood. You need to send a decree across 1,000 miles. How many carts would that take? How long would it take to even find the right document in an archive? It was an administrative nightmare. The Qi and Han dynasties were trying to manage a massive unified state. They needed a way to record laws, track taxes, and communicate with officials across vast distances efficiently. Bamboo just wasn't cutting it. This wasn't a quest for a better writing surface. It was a quest for a functional government. The invention of paper by Cai Lun and others was a direct response to this bureaucratic pressure. It was light, cheap, and easy to produce. Suddenly information could flow. Knowledge could be stored and retrieved. The empire could be managed. Paper wasn't just an invention. It was the software that allowed the hardware of the Chinese empire to actually run. It was a tool for survival, ensuring the state didn't collapse under its own weight. Now let's move from the office to the open road and talk about silk. We think of silk as a luxury, a beautiful fabric. And it was, but in ancient China it was so much more. It was infrastructure. It was currency. It was diplomacy. For centuries, China was the only place in the world that knew the secret of sericulture, how to cultivate silkworms and weave their threads into cloth. This monopoly gave them incredible economic power. Silk was so valuable and stable that it was often used as a form of currency, to pay soldiers and government officials. If you were a nomad on the northern frontier, you might not want a pile of bronze coins but a bolt of silk that was universally valuable. This turned silk into a powerful diplomatic tool. The Chinese court used it to manage their relationships with the powerful nomadic tribes on their borders, like the Zhongnu. Instead of constant, bloody warfare, they could use a tribute system. They would give these groups massive quantities of silk and other goods in exchange for peace and recognition of the emperor's authority. It was a sophisticated strategy of buying off potential threats. This network of trade and tribute eventually grew into the legendary Silk Road, the first great artery of globalization, connecting East and West. So, silk wasn't just about beautiful clothes. It was a strategic resource that built economic stability and managed foreign relations, helping to secure the empire's borders without constant war. It was a survival strategy woven from the threads of a tiny worm. This brings us to the most explosive invention of all, gunpowder. Its story is probably the most fascinating because it didn't come from a general's mind, but from an alchemist's workshop. Ancient Chinese Taoist alchemists were obsessed with a very human problem: mortality. They weren't trying to build a weapon. They were trying to find an elixir of life, a potion for immortality. They mixed all sorts of exotic ingredients, heating them, combining them, hoping for a miracle. One of their key ingredients was saltpeter, or potassium nitrate. They called it fire medicine. Sometime around the 9th century, one of these alchemists mixed saltpeter with sulfur and charcoal, and boom, they didn't find the secret to eternal life. Instead, they stumbled upon the secret to instantaneous death. The earliest records describe it as a substance that would fly and dance violently, burning hands and faces and even whole houses down. They had accidentally invented gunpowder. For a long time, it wasn't even used for war. Its first applications were in fireworks, for celebrations, and to scare away evil spirits. It perfectly matched the Taoist belief in controlling the powerful forces of nature. When it was finally weaponized, it was first used in things like fire lances, which were essentially flamethrowers, and rudimentary bombs more for shock and awe than for mass casualties. The invention of gunpowder is a powerful reminder that technology often comes from unexpected places, driven by our deepest human desires and fears, in this case the fear of death itself. So we have paper for administration, silk for economics and diplomacy, and gunpowder born from a spiritual quest. This reveals something profound about Chinese civilization. For over 1,000 years, China was arguably the most technologically advanced society on Earth. Yet, something is different here. Think about how the Roman Empire used its engineering prowess: roads, aqueducts, siege engines, all primarily to support military expansion and conquest. China's greatest innovations, however, were primarily inward-facing. They were developed to solve internal problems, to manage their own vast population, to stabilize their economy, and to deal with threats on their existing borders. Paper helped govern the empire they already had. Silk helped them manage their neighbors through trade and tribute, not conquest. Even gunpowder, the most obvious military tool, was developed slowly and used defensively for centuries before it was turned into the cannons and guns that would later transform European warfare. This isn't to say ancient China was purely peaceful. It had its share of brutal wars and dynasties built on conquest. But the overall technological trajectory was one of consolidation, not expansion. The goal was to create a stable, self-sufficient, and harmonious society, a goal deeply rooted in Confucian and Taoist philosophy. The Great Wall is the perfect symbol of this mindset. It's one of the most incredible engineering feats in human history, but its purpose is purely defensive. It's about keeping others out, not about projecting power outwards. This focus on internal stability and defense might be one reason why China, despite inventing gunpowder, didn't trigger the kind of global military revolution that Europe did centuries later. Their technology was a strategy for survival and endurance, for making their world sustainable, rather than a tool for conquering a new one. It's a different model of what it means to be a superpower, one based on resilience and management, rather than relentless expansion. And in today's world, as we face our own immense challenges of governance and sustainability, perhaps there are lessons to be learned from this ancient approach. Have you ever stood before the Great Wall of China or seen it in pictures and wondered what it truly represents? We often see it as a colossal military fortification, a stone dragon winding across mountains, built to keep invaders out. But what if its true purpose was not just about keeping people out, but about keeping a civilization in? What if the most formidable wall wasn't made of stone and earth, but was built inside the minds of the Chinese people themselves? Today, we're going on a journey beyond the bricks and mortar to explore the Great Wall within the psychological and cultural fortress that has allowed Chinese civilization to endure for millennia. The story of the Great Wall is fundamentally a story of two different ways of life clashing. On one side, you have the sedentary agricultural civilization of the Central Plains. Their world was one of predictability. You plant in the spring, you tend the fields in the summer. You harvest in the autumn, and you store your surplus for the winter. Life was tied to the land, to a specific place. This created a mindset that valued stability, order, and long-term planning. Their wealth was in the soil, in the granaries, in the cities they built. On the other side of the wall, you had the nomadic peoples of the steppes. Their world was one of constant movement. They followed the seasons, a mobile civilization on horseback, chasing greener pastures for their herds. Their survival depended on adaptability, on lightning-fast raids, and on taking what they needed when they found it. Their wealth wasn't tied to a place, but to their horses, their herds, and their martial prowess. For them, stability was stagnation. Movement was life. The Great Wall then was a physical manifestation of this deep philosophical divide. It was a line drawn in the sand saying, "Our world ends here." It was a declaration that the agricultural way of life, with its cities, its bureaucracy, and its intricate social structures, was fundamentally incompatible with the nomadic way of life. It was a monumental effort to create a predictable world in the face of an unpredictable one. The wall was a tool to manage risk. It couldn't stop a full-scale invasion, and history shows it often didn't, but it could slow down raids, control trade, and most importantly, serve as a powerful symbol. This symbol is where we find the Great Wall within. It was a psychological barrier. For the people inside, it reinforced a sense of shared identity. We are the people of the settled lands, the builders, the farmers. They are the riders of the steppe, the outsiders. This collective identity became a powerful, cohesive force. It wasn't just about geography, it was about culture. Building the wall required immense organization, a centralized state, and a shared purpose that spanned generations. This act of building itself strengthened the very civilization it was meant to protect. It created a project that unified millions of people under a single imperial banner. But the wall was just the most visible part of a much larger project, the project of continuity. And the true genius of Chinese civilization wasn't in its physical defenses, but in its social engineering. Let's talk about standardization. When the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, unified China, he did something far more profound than just connecting sections of the wall. He standardized everything. He standardized the currency, which meant a merchant from the south could trade seamlessly with one from the north. He standardized weights and measures, ensuring fairness and efficiency in commerce. Most crucially, he standardized the writing system. This was a masterstroke. While spoken dialects across China were and still are wildly different, someone from Beijing can't understand someone from Canton, they could all read the same script. An imperial edict written in the capital could be read and understood by a magistrate 1,000 miles away. A scholar in the Tang dynasty could read and understand texts written 1,000 years earlier in the Han dynasty. This written language became the ultimate tool for continuity. It was the software of Chinese civilization. It allowed ideas, history, philosophy, and administrative records to be passed down through dynasties with incredible fidelity. Dynasties rose and fell, capitals were sacked. The empire fractured and was reunited. But the written word endured. The memory of the civilization was preserved in countless texts. This created a powerful cultural gravity. Even when barbarian invaders like the Mongols or the Manchus conquered China, they were ultimately absorbed by its culture. To rule China, they had to adopt its language, its bureaucracy, and its Confucian ideals. The administrative system was so robust, so deeply ingrained, that it effectively conquered its conquerors. This brings us to a fascinating point about civilizational longevity. We often think that progress is all about innovation, about discovering the next big thing. But the Chinese model suggests that longevity might depend more on memory than on innovation. The emphasis was always on looking back, on studying the classics, on learning from the successes and failures of past dynasties. The mandate of heaven itself was a concept rooted in history. A ruler was judged against the standards of legendary sage kings from the distant past. This reverence for the past created a civilization that was incredibly resilient. It was like a cultural gyroscope. No matter how much it was knocked around by invasions, famines, or rebellions, it always tended to right itself, to return to its foundational principles. The core identity, encoded in the written language and the historical records, was never truly lost. So the Great Wall wasn't just a barrier against nomadic horsemen. It was the edge of a defined world. The real defense was the social and cultural system within that world. The standardized script that united minds across space and time, the bureaucratic tradition that could outlast any emperor, and the collective memory that prioritized continuity above all else. This great wall within was far more effective than any barrier of stone. It created a civilization that didn't just survive. It chose to endure. It built its foundation on the bedrock of its own past, ensuring that no matter what storms came, the core of its identity would remain unshaken. The greatest defense wasn't looking outward, but inward. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of a civilization and want to explore more big ideas from history, then you know what to do. Help us build our own wall of support brick by brick. Every like is a stone laid, every subscription is a guard tower raised. It helps our channel reach more curious minds just like you. I'm really grateful for your time and curiosity. Thanks for watching.